Thank you, Quinn, for a beautiful church. Thank you all for coming. I would like to start with prayer and then sort of frame our time together this morning. Lord, we do come humbly and expectantly before you. And more than anything, Lord, we seek your wisdom and the courage to grapple with uncomfortable truths. And we ask, Lord, that you would be with us in our discussion, be with all those even now affected by the doctrine of discovery. We bless Mark Charles and others who are speaking out about this issue, and we ask that you would just guide the church, guide the PCUSA, and guide other churches, Lord, to move forward in constructive, productive, hope-filled ways. And so guide us for this morning in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. We have 2.5 hours. I think we'll take a little break at the middle. My main purpose is for us to reflect together. And so what does that mean? I want us to think aloud, share our theologically guided thoughts. I know we've asked Mark Charles to address some sort of reform perspective, and we did not get much. And I understand why we didn't get much, because I think his heart is not so much in terms of engaging with the Reformed tradition, but more in terms of being an advocate for Native Americans. And so since that aspect did not get addressed, I just want to take this opportunity for us to begin to think. I'm not of the mind that we're going to address everything, but I think there is a way of proceeding, maybe a little bit chaotic, but I think we could at least get some pieces on the table. And one way of phrasing our reflection is like, how did they get there, or how did we get there as a church? Like, how in the world did this doctrine of discovery even get off the ground? And I think we could think about the doctrine of discovery kind of narrowly as a series of papal bulls, but I would say the doctrine of discovery could still be understood in terms of mentality, like a worldview. And that is both Catholics and Protestant European Christians were more or less of the same mind. You hear very little vocal opposition. No one's calling time out and saying this is wrong-headed theology, we shouldn't be doing this. Perhaps there were some voices, but from the readings that I've done, very little. And so that also tells us something. And I have some inklings why the doctrine of discovery was as readily accepted as it was. It's sort of the worldview of it. And so I think we have some reasons, stronger than hints, reasons why the doctrine of discovery theologically got grounded. But also in terms of present day relevance, to think about are some of these temptation and possibilities of a wrong theology or dysfunctional theology still present? And I would, in time, share that there are, and there are still warnings that we could pay heed to and be mindful, prayerful, and so this is not merely a historical reflection, but taking this case, reflecting on it, but also, are there some lessons for us? Are there some warnings or healthy reminders? And then the second part is, well, how do we move forward? Already the concept of lament has been presented, and we will actually have a follow-up to this April 29th. with David Gambrell at Lewinsville. And he'll unpack for us what does it mean to lament, and how do we even understand lament from a Reformed biblical perspective. And so I'm not going to delve too much into lament, but I also have some other thoughts about it. I don't think it's enough for us to just hear and bemoan, be saddened by what happened, and it just stops there. There's got to be some productive way to move forward, not to assuage any kind of guilt, but I think that we know that God is still at work, and God is in the healing business, or the reconciliation, even if don't use the word reconciliation. There's got to be ways to move forward, and I think there are, and so those are the main sort of thoughts or expectations I had. And so in one of these ads, I was tagged as a resident expert. I mean, I'm a fledgling, but I must admit, a fledgling expert. Just getting my wings, I haven't fully flown off out of the nest, and so I mean, I guess this is my first attempt at flight. I mean, land on the limbs of the rocks. We'll see. But I must confess, personally, this has been really riveting for me. It's just a strange self-discovery. And as I mentioned in my short response to Mark Charles on January 24th, or that January, visually speaking, I'm not the right candidate. I'm not white, I'm not Native American, but I am a U.S. citizen. As I mentioned, as a U.S. citizen, I receive the benefits of being a U.S. citizen, and I also receive its legacy of heartache and stuff. I mean, I don't pick and choose. So if I identify myself as an American citizen, then the history of America is also part of my new history. I can't just say that's the part I like and that's the part I don't like, so I don't want to even wrestle with that. But especially as a believer, I think we need to grapple with our overall inheritance, whatever that is. And so citizenship-wise, that's true, but also the doctrine of discovery is unnerving, uncomfortable, because theology was so much involved in it. It wasn't just empire. It wasn't just naked greed and hungry for power. It wasn't that. I mean, when we see the background to the doctrine of discovery, it was really rooted in kind of a distorted theology. And we could, as Protestants, say, well, that's a Catholic thing. Well, yeah. I mean, it started with Catholic, but I didn't hear any Protestant voices strong enough to, combat that or silence that. And so it's uncomfortable in many different ways. And I think there's a reason for the discomfort. I think if we don't identify with an issue, it's not that it could be comfortable, because we could simply say that's their business. I have nothing to do with it. But I think it's uncomfortable for us because we are part of this history and tradition, broadly speaking, Christian tradition. And so this is worthwhile. And so I've been riveted by it, which means economically, I've made Amazon very rich, and the authors and publishers a little more wealthy. And so I've been reading a lot. I've been reading all over the place. And this is multifaceted. And one issue I'm going to bring up is not directly related to the doctrine of discovery, but I think it's easy to fall prey to sort of the easy narrative or stereotype narrative of even America and the Native Americans. And the actual life and development of Native Americans is much more complicated. So it's not like the easy narrative is there's a bunch of peace-loving people in tune with nature and one another, and then these aggressive Europeans came and killed them off. Well, that wasn't the case. I mean, there was warfare, a lot of violence, even among the indigenous tribes. But again, that doesn't in any way license or justify what happened to them at the hands of European pushers, Americans. And so there's some fascinating. I've done some fun readings. Empire of the Summer Moon is worth reading, and so I'm a big Quanah Parker fan now. And so this is the story of the Comanches in the plains, especially around Texas Southern Plains. And I'm going to read a quote from that book in time, but it's the expansion westward was not because of the federal government was so aggressive. It was regular folks who actually believed God called them to this land and that the land belonged to them, come hell or high water, and they were tough. And so for many of them, like the Parker family, sort of Calvinist, primitive Baptist, they went to Texas in the face of sort of brutal reality, but they went there because they were convicted theologically that this land is theirs. So that's where the expansion actually came from, the power of expansion. So they even just disregarded the treaties that the federal government made. They said, heck with that, you guys we are going to do our thing. We're going to plant here and make our home here in the face of hostility, and so that's part of the story as well. Yeah. And so those are sort of my preliminary thoughts, and at any time during our discussion, if you have any questions or comments, please chime in. I don't see this again as a fledgling expert. I'm not in a position to lecture, pontificate from on high. So I just want to also for myself to process theologically. Yeah, Quinn.
It just on the surface, it seems to me that there are a lot of parallels with the development of apartheid in South Africa.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The right to the land, the theological underpinnings.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that. I think. Okay. I think the context that parallels our situation is apartheid, because one, it's a kind of reformed theology that created apartheid, but also how they addressed it, how like Alan Bosak, John DeGrucci, how they addressed it was theological. So I think it's a beacon of hope. Like, given the history of South Africa, what they went through, and so I think there are a lot of lessons to learn. And for the PCUSA, the Confession of Belhart also speaks. And so there was a letter attached to an American letter attached to the Dutch Reformed Church, and they mentioned that those are noted. Two things are noted as parallels, and that is the doctrine of discovery and enslavement of Black folks. And so I think that there's definitely light that's probably shed from the South African experience. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment on words, because words maybe matter. And I noticed in the book, the author several times used the phrase social imagination and also theological imagination.
Yeah.
So for the kind of biggest, highest level, what are we doing here question? I'm intrigued by imagination because I've never actually seen those couplings before. And you just said theologically process.
Yeah.
But I wonder if we might challenge ourselves. Certainly thinking and talking is very much within
Mm.
what's familiar to
Yeah,
us to
yeah,
do in a
yeah.
situation like this.
Yeah.
But maybe imagination has a role in getting us out of the box that we're in.
If you can answer
sure.
so that they can sort of understand the question. That'd be great.
Right. So Carolyn mentioned the importance, the relevance of the imagination. And Mark Charles does mention that. And I think that's in direct reference to Charles Taylor's work called Social Imaginary. And this philosopher, a Canadian philosopher, very insightful, says we see our worlds less in forms of like set of doctrines and beliefs, but we see our place in reality through the social imaginary, which are formed by myths, stories, symbols, narratives. It's a way of telling our story. Why are we here? What's going on? Who are these other people? And where are we going? And so that social imaginary, it has greater power of dictating how we negotiate life and how do we interact with people. And I would say the big social imaginary, there's a social imaginary at work behind the doctrine of discovery. So the doctrine of discovery was birthed and sustained not in some kind of vacuum. There was already a social imaginary of one's sort of identity with the group, whether you call yourself the elect, and later on it was articulated in terms of manifest destiny. Like there's a sense of God's calling upon us and what we are called to do. And so the social imaginary in many ways is the main driver. If we were to tell the story of a people and what happened to the indigenous people, it's the narrative, it's the group narrative, it's the story that's driving them. And again, I think Charles Taylor is the one that's referenced. Yeah.
Add on to that, I think that the social imaginary is the method of the metaphysical domain within which we construct the world.
That's right.
So
That's right.
no
That's right.
Other than terminology.
Yeah,
I
that's
hear,
right.
You know, I imagine the world like this.
Yeah, that's right.
And I would agree like that.
Yeah.
And so all of our metaphysical, anything that has language associated
Yeah.
with metaphysical.
Yeah.
It's a completely abstract construct for the metaphysical.
Yeah.
We get confused language with what is labeled. We're getting the same problem we're going to be dealing with.
Yeah.
When we separate reality from the metaphysical thought.
Yeah.
We get to make up our own rules in the way that it's effective. So I think that is the central piece of the book.
Yeah.
And he uses it 100 times, not several times.
Yeah.
Comes back and says, under the worldview at the time,
Yeah.
or our worldview now.
Yeah.
And I think centralizing a much easier word to use than social imagination. But that's what it really is.
Yeah. Yeah. The main difference is the worldview could be presented statically. You know, these are our beliefs about reality. The social imaginary has a narrative. And so people naturally think narratively, story form. You know, and so that's where the destiny comes in, calling comes in, evolution, progress comes in, you know, and so but you're right. I mean, it's there's an overlap. It's worldview put in narrative terms.
Most people's worldview.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
It is a conceptual, social token of their fitting in.
Yeah.
And not necessarily the world they actually make choices.
Yeah,
Big
yeah.
difference.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. I mean, there's.
Right.
I think that's where my hunch of what went wrong comes in. It's the subconscious. It's the biases and blind spots. And because we're dealing with worldview, social imagination, that's where the theology comes in.
All
Because-
theology
yeah,
is social.
yeah. So that's why theology is at the heart of this issue. So let me just continue. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I was going to say.
Yeah,
get
let's-
out your title.
Yeah, sure. And so just background and the best short, accurate description of doctrinal discovery is the PCUSA report. It's free to download. I mean, it's got dense but pointed, relevant information. And so I'm just highlighting from this report that was presented in 2018. The overture was made 2 years prior from the National Presbyterian Church. So we are sitting at the start, the genesis of this, and Quentin was part of that. And so please read the report, and it's got a lot of good descriptive explanation and a set of recommendations, and some of which I'll highlight. And so where did this thing get started? And we are dependent on scholarly help, and this is not the place or the time to debate whether or not these scholars have got it right, but I'm just going to trace that history. So the thought of the doctrine of discovery goes back at least to the Crusades, 1026 to 1271. And in 1245, Canon Law, Pope Innocent XIV makes a certain interpretation. Yeah, Pope Innocent IV. And he takes this discourse between Jesus and Peter in John 21, where Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." Okay? And that passage is applied, one to the Pope, the Bishop Peter representing the line of popes, and then there's an unusual interpretation of who the sheep are. and so you have this use of scripture, okay, a use of the Bible. So Christ's command to Peter to feed my sheep is interpreted as a papal jurisdiction over both Christians and infidels. Both infidels and faithful belong to Christ's flock by virtue of their creation. Okay. And so the Pope has jurisdiction over all human beings and power over them in law, but not in fact. And so by law, so Christ gives this command to Peter. Peter, you have the authority, or you are commanded to feed the sheep. And so that passage gets expanded in an unbelievable way, and say, who is Peter now? The Pope. Who's the sheep? Well, yeah, the church, but more. And so the Pope now has jurisdiction over all people. So that's the basis. And then a series of papal bulls are articulated in the 15th century. And in summation at the end, again, from this report, by 1494, the doctrine of discovery stood on 4 points, as defined by the Church, Portugal, and Spain. 1, the church possessed authority to grant Christian kings, monarchs, title and sovereignty over indigenous peoples and their lands. So the Pope, it starts with the Pope, and now the Pope has the authority to grant to Christian kings. Okay. So that authority is transmitted over. And number 2, European exploration, conquest, and colonization was designed to assist the papacy in exercising its guardianship over the entire earthly flock. Okay. And so, of course, if the sheep includes the believers and non-believers, then the kings will and the queens will say, "We'll help you, Pope. We'll Christianize. We'll make sure the infidels know that you are the leader, or Jesus is the leader." Yeah. Number 3, Portugal and Spain held exclusive rights over the other European countries to colonize the world. Okay. So at the end of 15th century, that's the agreement. Portugal and Spain, Catholic powers. And then number 4, the mere discovery of lands by Portugal and Spain in the respective spheres of influence and engagement in symbolic acts of possession on these lands was sufficient to establish their ownership rights. And that is basically, once you stick your flag, that land is yours. The land that you see and the land that you don't see at that point, but whatever that land is connected, that is yours. So then the question is, okay, what about the Protestants? I mean, okay, there's a paper trail with the Catholics. Like you just follow the documents and interpretation, there's a paper trail.
No. Well.
Oh, right.
You meant.
Yeah, right. But I mean, right. I'm on to 15, 17, right. But in terms of the actual, if you had evidence in terms of a paper trail, it's definitely clearly articulated at this point, and then continued forward with Portugal and Spain even after the Protestant Reformation, that kind of.
Complicating this.
Yeah.
As I think about it from what I taught medieval Reformation church history. To put it in modern day terms, there is this fierce power struggle from the 6th, 7th century on between church and state. And who has authority, ultimate authority, the emperor or the pope? And so what we have here is the emperor doesn't have any armies. Excuse me, the pope doesn't have any armies, but the pope does have God. Well, right. When the Pope grants all of these great powers the right to do this, when it assumes the authority to do this, it's implying that they are subject. The emperor is subject to the Pope.
That's right.
And so that's playing into all of this as well, because the church has a lot of fiscally at stake, all the land that they own, and sort of the struggle back and forth. There's always this conflict between earthly power and heavenly power,
Or it's earthly power and religion.
and religion. Yeah, but
Well, no, earthly power is religion. Religion is an earthly power.
okay, but there is that tension, and that underlies this as well.
Between the social and religious fabric and the culture is always friction.
Right. I mean, we'll get to the place. Like it's important to understand how theology, or where it lands. Meaning theology is always contextualized or indigenized, and so when the gospel of Christian theology gets embedded in an empire, you are going to with cultural bias and blind spot articulate a theology from your standpoint. The early church, you're going to articulate a theology from position of political powerlessness. So Paul brought poverty, persecution, power of the Holy Spirit, and so even in the early church, the theology is going to look different than a few hundred years later, and so. But that's a phenomenon that we're going to get to, and that happens all the time. It's just human. Theologies are done by human beings, institutions and human beings who are embedded, who have other allegiances. So it's very difficult to break away from that, and so I think what we do see in kind of empathy is right. If the church and state are so closely aligned. And these are very powerful institutions. What kind of theology will come forth from that, and it shouldn't surprise us. But I do want to move ahead to the Protestant version, and I'm just going to quote this section from the report again. There's a reference to Robert H. Williams, the American Indian and Industrial Legal Thought, and it's a little vague, nothing really specific. But let me just go ahead with this. The genealogy of the legal discourse of the Protestant crusade against the infidels of America traces the process by which the medieval discourses of the Catholic Church were domesticated and combined with other discursive practices appropriate for a variety of English and non-English sources. But very vague, and but the way I read it is that the worldview was definitely shared.
Where is that?
This is well, in the report, it's page 6.
Okay, thank you.
Page 6. The whole section begins at page 5, under the heading "Doctrine as applied by Protestant British Empire." And so Justice Marshall, we're going to get to this consequential case of 1823, reference a 1497 patent issued by King Henry VII to John Cabot to illustrate the origin of the principle of discovery. Although the first discovery voyage did not take place until 65 years later, under the reign of his granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth I, this patent demonstrated English interest in America as a possible colonial empire. Henry VII's charter of conquest notably limited Cabot's patent to avoid lands which had been granted to Portugal by the Pope. He was to sail only to lands unknown to all Christians in the north, south, west, and east, avoiding Africa to the south. Henry VII issued other patents, which also prohibited colonizing lands recognized to be under the papally granted sovereignty of the Portuguese crown. And so basically English had their version. We don't want to get into war with Portugal, avoid these lands, but there are new worlds. And even the language, reveals the thought. New worlds, New England, New Amsterdam, New York. And so these are new places to inhabit. Okay, so that just the names, the labels, tell us a bit about the outlook, and a sense that these places, though inhabited, are places for them. Okay. And so that's not terribly difficult to understand. The fascinating aspect, the most fascinating aspect for me in my reading, Unsettling Truths, and further reading by Conquest by Law, is how is this directly, the doctrine of discovery, how is it so relevant to us? And that question is answered legally. And this book by Lindsay A. Robertson really unpacks that. And so in 1823, a case comes before the Supreme Court, Johnson's versus McIntosh. And in the book, he says it's a collusive case. I mean, so between 1773 and 75, there's a land in Southern Illinois that the Native Americans sold to Johnson. And then he deeded that land to his son and grandson. And then later on, like 1818, the U.S. government wanted to give some of that overlapping land to McIntosh. So Johnson sued, hey, that's our land. And it went up through the courts, appeals process, Supreme Court, lands on the Supreme Court. And John Marshall writes his opinion. Now, he could have just stuck with the opinion, but he expanded. And so this is it's worth quoting from Robertson. And he puts, I'm going to be quoting a few sections here. At the very beginning, this is Roman number 9. What rights did Europeans acquire and indigenous people lose upon the discovery of the New World? The answer, according to the court, was ownership of all discovered lands. discovery converted indigenous owners of discovery lands into tenants on those lands. The underlying title belonged to the discovering sovereign. The indigenous occupants were free to sell their quote lease, but only to the landlord. They were subject to eviction at any time. More than 180 years later, I mean, it's actually 200 years ago, February of 1823. Yeah, this year. The discovery doctrine is still the law. It's still with us. And as Mark Charles mentioned, and as this report mentioned, it comes up in 2005. And so this case is as relevant as back then as today. Now, what's interesting is that Marshall has misgivings soon after finding out how his opinion is being used. Okay, so let me read this section here. This is page 11, Roman number 11. Marshall's incorporation of the discovery doctrine into the Johnson opinion led to political catastrophe for Native Americans. To Marshall's distress, Georgians seized on the doctrine as justification for the passage of an act imposing a Georgia law on the Cherokees. This action inspired Congress to pass the Indian Removal Act of 1830, and the forced migration of the Eastern tribes began. When the legitimacy of the doctrinal theory underlying these acts came before the court in Rooster versus Georgia in 1832, Marshall repudiated the discovery doctrine, but by then it was too late. Marshall's death in 1835 and the filling of the court with Andrew Jackson's appointees prevented the securing of this repudiation. And the U.S. has inherited a legal regime dependent on their subsequent politically driven resurrection of a wrongly decided collusive case. And so he writes this opinion, references the 1497 patent, which is basically the land. So the court basically, Marshall says, both of you guys are wrong. You guys don't have the right to the land. The legitimate owner was the British Empire, but now the owner that's transfer the existing power, empire or government, empire, America. And so I mean, people read the opinion. Cherokees in Georgia, hey, the land belongs to us. We could tell them where to go. You guys are going to Oklahoma.
I didn't understand. I mean, it's the British, the ownership didn't change. The British.
Oh well, right. Once we fought the war, and so Marshall's argument is that it was originally the British, and so the next in line, so to speak, will be the.
Okay, so I don't see that. Why that's a repudiation of the original.
No. So he wanted to repudiate the doctrine. He wanted to repudiate
that decision.
Yeah, that decision because of its.
But I don't see how that affected the ownership. Still, the United States owns the land. According to us, because we took it fair and square. Well, I didn't follow it. All reasons.
Yeah.
The legal case wasn't tied way back to the streets. And they threw that on like chain ownership now. Yeah, well, if he says, oh, let me be clear, it's the British own the land. Okay, fine. But the United States owns the land. So there's really no difference with respect to the Indians. It's like you don't have a lease, therefore you just turn it into.
But I mean, he put in the principle of discovery. I think if he had simply said the land is owned by such and such, and just put a period at it, there's no larger principle at work. And so once the principle of discovery is pulled in, and sad to say, this decision will be applied in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand for how they treat indigenous people on their lands. And so the distress for Marshall looking back is, I could have made the opinion shorter and just stuck with the case instead of bringing in this larger principle. I think that's where the qualms lay, because it was used to dispossess the indigenous folks from the lands. And so again, so the ownership title belongs to the U.S. government. The indigenous people have occupancy rights, right, and they have that right as long as they live on the land, or they're expelled, and so it's not permanent occupancy rights, and so that's the legal impact of the doctrine of discovery.
So John, did Marshall repudiate based upon just the English he left off? Doctrine of discovery in his finding, or did he have a more fundamental change in his?
Well, right. I think it's his reaction to how it was used, but again, he could have made the opinion shorter and not brought in the principle of discovery, and
But we don't know whether or not he had a more fundamental change in his.
Right. I don't think so. I mean, again, he's doing the scholarship and finding out, okay, who owns the land, and again, I think and that's why I think for Robertson, his assessment is, look, Marshall is an intelligent, well-meaning guy who unleashed this unforeseeable series of consequences. And so it's more in response to the consequence. That it's more in the area of wisdom, I don't think he would have changed his mind in terms of the land, because they were all of the opinion, but because he explicitly appealed to the doctrine of discovery, that's how.
And this is part of an entire chapter in the United States history where Andrew Jackson is reshaping fundamentally what democracy is and how it works. And I know that not because I'm an expert, but I recently read about that though, and they reference the Indian Removal Act without, this book did, without really going into what we're going to do.
Okay, Madeline has a question.
Carol made earlier, as you mentioned, but this was a worldview emerging. This judge has had to be with long way, long time.
I have a comment, if it's possible.
Yeah, 1 second, Madeline.
So the worldview that created is what we're dealing with now.
That's right.
And so, that guy stumbled on it and the way you do law says somebody got something stupid, you gotta keep doing it stupid. When you do law. But, we're left with a view that inherently has that belief in it that anything we discover new protein in your body, you own it. In fact, we discover right up to this minute that anything on claim it, sure. Genius people. So that's the problem, and then we're seeing the history, the paper trail, as you call it. But the paper trail is behind the edge of culture. It's unfolding.
That's right. Right. I think the paper is a reflection. Madeline?
Yes. Oh my goodness, my clock is just starting to strike. What I would like to remind us all is that the reason this happened so easily and has such a theological grip on us dates back to the 4th century when Constantine, imperial power, took over the church and reorganized it into an authoritarian patriarchal state. And so we have this event, these subsequent events that basically build on the power of the church to speak for the whole world. And drawing with it all of the ethnocentrism of European white power. That's all.
Male.
Well, male goes without speaking. Patriarchal power.
Constantine and Andrew Jackson bundle, that's right.
Right, right.
Straight line of Trump.
How are you feeling? You wanna take a little break or how are people feeling?
I don't know, 15 more minutes?
Yeah, let's,
Halfway.
yeah, right, right.
10 more minutes?
So this is, maybe we could just get started. And so Madeline just mentioned, but let me ask Madeline on this, like, is there something deeper than Constantine? I mean, meaning
Deeper than what?
deeper than Constantine.
Oh,
And so this is where we want to reflect together. What happened, theologically speaking?
Well, one thing that's deeper than Constantine is Rome. Just start with Rome and say if you lash on religion, it just becomes a convenience to continue Rome. I mean, it's a conquering empire.
Yep.
So
That's right.
you just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And so everything afterward doesn't seem like a surprise at all.
Right.
the Jesus movement was opposed to the power of Rome.
So basically, what happens when the emperor converts? What happens when the senators convert? And let's just imagine this sincere conversion. What happens the president of the U.S. converts or Senate? What happens?
Converts to what?
They
Your version.
they
What's
fit-
their version?
they fit their
Version. It depends on which you mean.
they
If it comes to state religion, then it's different from, Christianity. It's just like the Romans saying, okay, I conquered you. Now we have a cult. You're supposed to honor the emperor as a deity. So if you don't do that, it's got to be a special reason.
Yeah, I'm getting to. I mean, maybe I'm maybe directing it a little bit. Let's just imagine I'm the emperor, and I just have a powerful encounter through the gospel. It's all sincere as a human being. And I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior and so forth. Now I am still emperor. I am still emperor. Lord, what do you want me to do? How should I govern? So this is at the human level what's happening in the ideal sincere case. Unless you feel called to relinquish your emperorship and become a monk, but you feel convicted, I am called here, God has called me to be an emperor. What's going to happen? Well, I'm going to come under the lordship, but some of the things I may not even question is what it means to be an emperor. Defend the nation, conquer new lands. Those things are still in place because at the heart of being emperor is to be in charge of the empire. Okay,
So the first thing I'm going to do is baptize all my subjects.
that's right, and that is the conversion history in missions.
It's also about this thing happens.
Yeah, sure. So it's a human.
It's about 400 years.
Yeah, I mean,
Within that 1,000-year window, not knowing those kind of qualities, right now, those are all about the same thing. You take that European mindset, it was all about Europe, but it was a broad, empire-driven power.
But to John's point, it doesn't work for us to say, well, we know because we are sincere and we are truly converted. But for them, it was just all a sin of the power play. I mean,
but it wasn't.
First thing, I don't think we're pure, right?
Okay, but
I think we're stuck in the same culture we're married. We're trying to figure out how to get out of this one.
Yeah, and so I think there's some insights. I'm just going from a missiologist, Andrew Walls. Carol.
But what's deeper?
Yeah.
Would it be wrong to suggest that satanic temptation is
Yeah.
subtle and deep?
Let's figure it out.
Would I be wrong to suggest that satanic temptation is subtle and deep and ever present?
What kind of temptation is?
Well.
Like Jesus in the wilderness, take over the powers of the world. Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly, yeah.
Just asking.
That's the text. That's the text.
That's right. That's right.
What's the other kind of temptation that's not?
The world, the flesh, and the devil are all different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Distinction.
Sin.
Now it gets good.
So let
That's the
me
difference.
take the notion of temptation. So temptation comes to us as possibilities. And that is, if you're powerless, there's no possibility you're going to be emperor. There's no possibility you're going to be persecuted, because that's unrealistic. Now, if you're the emperor, there's a whole series of possibilities as an emperor that's in front of you. Hence, you're tempted by that. And unless you have a check on that or an awareness or someone brings to your attention, those will function as biases and blind spots. And I think where Andrew Walls, a missiologist, points out, there are always these two principles that work when the gospel gets received. And that's one, the envisionizing principle. And that is the gospel makes its home in you. When in Acts 15, when the Council of Jerusalem were debating whether the Gentiles could be part of Israel without being Jews, they had no idea at that point that in a short order of time, most of the Christians will be Gentiles, and that they will be, the Jewish believers will be in trouble. And so when the gospel gets received, it's natural. I would say I think this is the human predicament. It gets envisionized, meaning part of your worldview. Not every part will be checked. Some of that worldview, or the social imaginary, will continue to go forward. And so I think this is the explanation in a gracious way of saying we could relate to a counselor. We could relate to these folks because we could relate to possibilities and temptations. And especially for an emperor, people in power, to call into question the reason for their existence or the source of their existence, the very dominating power, that is very difficult. I mean, it's very difficult to relinquish that. I mean, it reminds me of the parable of the rich young ruler. So all that you have, and if his identity is so wrapped up in his wealth, give to the poor, what are you talking about? I could do all these other things. And so that's the, real challenge.
So here's a parallel. I own a business, and it's a very successful business. And then I have a sincere conversion experience. And now I want to run a Christian company.
Yeah.
And so I will do different things and I will implement different things, but I'm still in the business of making money. And if that means that I have to, source in an exploitative kind of way, and this, that, and the other thing, I'm not. That's part of the same social imagination. I don't have many examples of emperors, but I think I've seen more than a few situations where Christians are running companies that are, and then problems come in.
Unclothed people claiming
Well, the conversion, and it's interesting with Andrew Ross, he uses understanding conversion versus proselyte. And so the conversion is a long process, a process involving formation, and some of your evil actions will be like, oh Lord, forgive me. As a Christian now, I'm not going to steal and kill. But I may, so some of the things will be blatantly obvious if you're killing and stealing. But you may not be aware that intimidation is wrong, threats are wrong, insider information may be wrong, there's some gray areas that you've been operating in to do business well, that you don't see it as sinful, you know, and especially when everybody else is doing it. And so this is, I think, the human condition, or the human reaction to theology. And you can see, and you could take a cross section of almost any culture that gets Christianized. Like with Christianity in Korea, the sort of the Confucian values never got confronted directly. So what happened? So in a Confucian value, it's a hierarchy, and the sage is highlighted. Well, guess who the new sage is? It's the educated clergy. He steps right in, and it's a he. And so there's going to be cultural blind spots and biases, some of which will not be questioned. Because you don't see it. That's right. That's right. Unless somebody, I think this is where the dialogue comes in, so if a whole culture has the same blind spot, they're not going to see it. But if somebody else comes along and says, hey, what you guys are saying and doing is painful, it's hurtful, this is the impact, then you have a hope. You have some hope to listen to somebody else and address that blind spot. But if nobody else is calling you to raise an issue, then you're not going to see it. Annette.
Hey, this is Annette. I am sitting here thinking about what you're saying, but also what I wanted to mention was, and this might be a little off topic, and then I'll come back, how Australia was started by sending prisoners to Australia as a penal colony, which kind of ties back sort of in a book called White Trash. And that's a very good read. And it kind of ties in maybe a little bit to the Doctrine of Discovery, not a whole lot, but some aspects of it. But I'm also thinking, slaves in Constantine's day, they were also educated, and we see the slave imagery with on Mises, which is my saint, and is it Paul that sends them back? And so you had slavery within that system during Constantine time. So I am speculating here when we're talking about slaves in that world versus the slaves to go out and conquer the new world, that they needed supplies and everything else to support the new world that they discovered, versus the slavery that was already there when Constantine was in power. Does that make sense?
Right. I mean, in terms of the same slavery, but ancient slavery is from American slavery.
And then try to mute while you're responding, please.
I mean, in terms of the characteristics of slavery, characteristics of slavery.
I think her point, though, was the penal colony.
Yeah.
Those folks eventually became colonizers of Australia, and so that was that they had to be supported, and eventually were like set free. And that was a different process than.
What I'm thinking is that there are lots of connections to the Doctrine of Discovery that are not so apparent at first. Quinn's comment, I do happen to work for a Christian small business that's very successful. And I guess the temptation, as it were, that my colleagues most often fall into is a prosperity gospel kind of thing.
Right.
But then that's a sense of entitlement to economic success because we are Christians. And doesn't the Doctrine of Discovery with land and all of the resources on the land, and we are entitled to it, was that a precursor to prosperity gospel?
Well, I think we're about to break, but I want to make a general comment. I think that whoever PR firm were talking about this, didn't. They did a great job. To call this horrible thing
Yeah,
discovery.
right, right.
I had this now 100 times arguing with people around. This should be called doctrine of exploitation.
Yep.
Of the other.
That's right.
And as long as you're exploiting the other,
Yep,
even no matter how sincere your version of
yep,
conviction
that's
is,
right.
it's just a homemade version.
Yep.
And when you think you don't share, at least I don't think you share, you know, I never know what the content is. That if you're not one of us,
Yeah.
you know the color
That's
hat
right.
we wear, advanced
Yeah.
games. You're other, and we're no holds barred. It's not one of us. There's no stealing. There's no exploitation.
That's right.
There's no wrong.
That's
to
right.
others.
That's right.
That's at the heart of the matter. Finding discoveries. Now, like, yeah, that's a piece of the puzzle. Is the way the Catholics started.
That's right.
And the legal system got on board. But it's the heart of the modern Enlightenment philosophy that which you can discover and understand and exploit. In fact, it's your job to exploit what we can understand.
Right, right.
And that's what we got to deal with the next 100 years. Is moving away from that central feature of our worldview.
Yeah.
Is that what we can figure out and exploit for ourselves.
Yeah.
At the cost of others.
Yeah.
Is fine by God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not God.
Right.
Makes the change.
Right. I think Flynn gets it right. I mean, if we were to come up with an accurate name, it wouldn't be discovery. You know, definitely it's exploitation. And so this doctrine of discovery is never used for other European nations. Only used for people who look different, you know, and so there's, let's continue. What happened theologically speaking? There are many aspects to it. I think, Glenn, what you had mentioned, while we were taking a break, I think that may be worth sharing. I mean, you know, in terms of the others.
Well, we were just continuing the conversation of comment before the break, which was that I don't think we should continue to honor this by calling it the doctrine of discovery. I think at minimum it ought to be called the Catholic. I like your prince. The Catholics had a version. The Protestants had a version. The legal system in the United States had a version. And those versions of this fundamental philosophy, not a doctrine, it's a philosophy that underlies the doctrine, is around the exploiting other. As long as they're other, not one of us, you can kill them, steal their stuff, do whatever you want to do. I don't care what, I don't care if they're Samaritan and a good one at that. You can do whatever you want to other. And at the heart of what Jesus says, no. To the least of these, to the ones not like the people who need our help as a community. It's not about you winning at others' problem. It's got to that now. Most of us are up to here with actually exploiting the earth, exploiting the country, exploiting other people, exploiting our neighbors, exploiting our friends. We're up to here because that's what we said was going to help us keep our head above water. It was clawing over the other guys.
Yeah. So I want to, you know, follow up on that. I think as I was reflecting theologically what's going on, it was, I landed less on theology proper, more on how we view people. And so then I got 3 books related to it. Let me just burst everyone's bubble. We all work in stereotypes.
Concepts are.
Yep, that's what categories are, concepts are. And the authors of this book have a theory why that is. And it initially sounds counterintuitive. And that is, we work with stereotypes in order to perceive individuals. Okay, and so quickly. And as I was reading it, let me just give you a little description so you could kind of understand the concept by an example. We do this all the time. Imagine a person who walks past you while you wait to board an airplane 5 identifiers will almost always be immediately available: sex, age, race, height, and weight. Clothing may permit us to add multiple other identifiers, perhaps including income, social class, religion, ethnicity, and occupation. Each of these identifiers has stereotypical traits associated with it. When our minds automatically activate all these stereotypes at once, we get a rich, complex perception of the person, even though the passerby we are contemplating is a total stranger. After no more than a brief glance, we should be able to distinguish this passerby from just about everyone else in sight, and quite possibly from everyone else in the airport. This is why we conclude that mental virtuosity allows us to use stereotypes to perceive strangers as distinct individuals. And so in terms of how we perceive the other, we have natural association. So there's something called the implicit association test. And so and there's a test for white preference or black, and so this is a function of the human brain. Okay, so this is not theological per se, but whenever we're encountering the other, there are association. Some of it's positive, often it's negative. And so does it make sense for the doctrine of exploitation, discovery, so forth, that this is applied to people that look different? Language is different. Ways of life are different. And so forth. And so you have a whole host of race, height, lifestyle, language, and so that perception of the other comes up in words like barbarians, savages, infidels, uncivilized. They, right. And so basically, they are different, but they're different in a negative way, or they need what we have.
They got their
right.
They don't, and they're
right. And so this is part of, it's not theology per se, but it is part of our sort of social life. And let me read this, and it's not just one group versus another. These things get internalized. Okay, so this is a book we're reading, Bias by Jennifer Eberhardt, who's American African-American man. That's the background. So she gets invited by this police force to address police brutality, and they're not connecting with her. And so she tells the story, and this is very good. I explained that some years ago, my son Everett and I were on a plane. He was 5 years old, wide-eyed, and trying to take it all in. He looked around and saw a black passenger. He said, "Hey, that guy looks like Daddy." I looked at the man, and truth be told, he did not look anything like Daddy, not in any way. I looked around for anyone else Everett might be referring to, but there was only one black man on the plane. I couldn't help but be struck by the irony, the face researcher having to explain to her own black child that not all black people look alike. But then I paused and thought about the fact that kids see the world differently from adults. Maybe Everett was seeing something that I missed. I decided to take another look. I checked the guy's height, no resemblance there. He was several inches shorter than my husband. I studied his face. There was nothing in his features that looked familiar. I looked at his skin color, no similarity there either. Then I looked at his hair. This man had dreadlocks flowing down from his back. Everett's father is bald. I gathered my thoughts and turned to my son, prepared to lecture him in the way that I might inform an unobservant student in my class. But before I could begin, he looked up at me and said, "I hope the man doesn't rob the plane." Maybe I didn't get that right. "What did you say?" I asked him, wishing I had not heard what I heard. And he said it again, innocently and as sweetly as you can imagine from a bright-eyed boy trying to understand the word. "I hope he doesn't rob the plane." I was on the brink of being upset. Why would you say that? I asked as gently as I could. You know, Daddy wouldn't rob a plane. Yes, he said, I know. Well, why did you say that? This time my voice dropped an octave and turned sharp. Everett looked at me with a really sad face and said very solemnly, I don't know why I said that. I don't know why I was thinking that. Just telling that story reminded me of how much that moment hurt. I took a deep breath, and when I looked back at the crowd in the auditorium, I saw that the expressions had changed. Their eyes had softened. They were no longer uniformed police officers, and I was no longer a university researcher. We were parents, unable to protect our children from a world that is often bewildering and frightening, a world that influences them so profoundly, so insidiously, so unconsciously that they and we don't know why we think the way we do. So I think a lot of this operates at a subconscious level. And for a 5-year-old to say, I don't know why I said that. Well, he's taken in the world. He's making associations with news or video or whatever. And so the way our brains work is in categories and stereotypes. And because it's subconscious, the worldview, the things we say we believe in, and the things we really believe in subconsciously are often at crossroads. I mean, you know. And I think this whole doctrine of exploitation discovery, let me ask, at the deeper level, and part of that is this cultural blind spot and bias of the other. And that's where the social imaginary comes in. Your place in the world and their place in the world, and then you have to decide what that relationship is. And unless there is sincere respect and honor of the other and God-given rights, if that's not affirmed, then your actions toward them will be dictated otherwise. It's going to be shaped otherwise.
And we make laws to codify.
That's right. And that's why the Johnson v. McIntosh was so powerful. It codified, it legitimized, legally speaking, and mentally speaking, the view, the deeper view. John Marshall's decision didn't create it. He did not create. He pulled it in, and it just confirmed what people believed in. Yeah, already doing it. English, the 1497. He was doing researches on international law, and so he pulled it in. So, but again, it's a legitimization of what people were thinking and believing, and so he had the stamp of a legal decision. Any other thoughts in terms of theology at work? What do you think?
We talk way too much, I find it better, is we did it to the Indians, we did it to the Bites, we did it to the Hispanics, we did it to them, we did it to them, we did it to all of them. It's not many of them that have been exploited that were unique in the fact that our culture, our Western modern culture, was exploited. And we did everybody. Anybody who along the way is upset about their particular connection. You're all in that. Hopefully the modern mindset, the modern worldview. Exploitation is not only okay, it's why. Get ahead.
But if no one has other comments, I like to kind of shift. I mean, it's related to reform response. I mean, this is.
Maybe this is a segue, but I do think Christianity authorizing privilege and a special call is not only about other. There's something internal to that.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
It would also be interesting that Ross would be doing that.
I know, wouldn't it? Though?
Yeah. I mean, it's the hope to just reverse the whole thing, but.
This National Geographic article, at least I was scanning and break. And it starts at least with Canada. And the demonstrations that preceded Pope, and the question was, will the Pope renounce the doctrine? And I had not somehow heard or picked up that news that was a possibility, an issue, and it does raise an interesting question. This Pope has done a lot of things. Why wouldn't he?
Right.
Say something about that? Anyway.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Annette. I was on a nuns and nuns phone call, and and we were discussing the Catholic Church role in all this. And as of today, the bishops have not said anything about the doctrine of discovery, nor make an apology or offer any other ideas that this theology is bad. And so I was wondering, how can, as the global church, regardless of your denomination, come together and do an ecumenical, I guess, reflection, action item, so and so and so and so after all this is over with? I'm just throwing that out, along with some of the more, I hate to term it like this, but I'm going to say the more liberal, knowledgeable Catholics who know about this, and see how we can get this out in the public's eye and the public's mind, because this is so important that we can't just, keep it among ourselves. This is kind of like we need to almost say this is good news, evangelize, and how can we turn this horrible news into something good? How can we, as a resurrected church, make this death of a document, it's really dying, it's putting people to death, how can we raise it up to be something for a more equal and just society?
Yeah, Annette, on that note, the World Council of Churches has done some work on this. You might just look up World Council of Churches Doctrine of Discovery. And I'm trying to figure out which year this was.
2012
Thank you.
was their
But whether it's
statement. They renounced.
whether it's been spread further, national council, etc., it would take a little more research to know.
And we'll get back to what we can do. But I do want to, this is the Reform Institute.
Yeah.
Do we have any resources?
Yeah.
Or their perspective? And I think in this area there is. And we can't do any better than and go to John Calvin. And so he's got a really, not just an interesting insight about injustice, but a profound one. And so this is a commentary on Habakkuk. This is a text, his commentary on the Minor Prophets. And the particular passage he's commenting on is Habakkuk 2:6. Shall not everyone taunt such people and with mocking riddles and say about them, this is from the NRSV, I mean, this is for us. Alas for you who heap up what is not your own, how long will you load yourselves with goods taken in pledge? And so he's going to comment on this cry of how long when the oppressed cries out. And so he says, how long, when anyone disturbs the whole world by his ambition and avarice, or everywhere commits plunders or oppresses miserable nations, when he distresses the innocent, all cry out, how long? And this cry, proceeding as it does from the feeling of nature and the dictate of justice, is at length heard by the Lord. The oppressed know that this confusion of order and justice is not to be endured. And this feeling, is it not implanted in us by the Lord? It is then the same as though God hears God's self and God hears the cries and groaning of all those who cannot bear injustice. I haven't come across that kind of connection. I mean, usually the cry for justice is a cry from human beings, but he makes two connections. Is that cry not implanted by the Lord? Where is that cry for justice coming from? It's from the Lord. And if that is true, aren't we saying in so many words that God is crying for justice? I mean, that's, and so like, on which side are we on after we say it, on the side of God? Then you got it, yeah, right. And so that's, and that has to be defined in terms of this, you know. And so we get this, and I would say in recent times, the text that speaks most poignantly of this situation is the Confession of Belhar that was developed out of South Africa. I'm just going to highlight a few. There was a letter sent from the American Church. I think this, you see what, well, I think National Capital, I think. And this is a letter. I mean, this is not in itself part of the confession, but
It's from the special committee.
yeah. Reformed/Presbyterian Christians who came to the New World of the North American continent carried with them a sense of their own election and privilege. They too came to a quote, promised land of new beginnings, seeking freedom and opportunity for themselves. They brought with them an understanding of the gospel that was not whole, that did not understand the completed work of Jesus Christ on the cross, that called for the church to be visibly one, to complicate matters. In order to develop the new world's economic base, lands and workers were needed. Native Americans were removed from their lands and African slaves imported to be source of cheap labor and so forth. And it's a way of owning up, you know, more specifically Reformed Presbyterian roles. And they came under the understanding of promised land and so forth. Yeah, that narrative. And that narrative is still so strong. And I didn't mention this, but America is still, my parents, just very briefly, my mom had us come in, not because of any religious promised land, because having worked in the U.S. Embassy in Korea as a young woman, she knew if she cannot make it in Korea, my kids will be uneducated and we will live in poverty. And so America was a beacon, and she's 95 now. And still her greatest joy in life is being here in America. And so that promised land, it doesn't have to be in terms of the scripture, but it's a place of what? Opportunity, freedom. That is so very strong, you know. And so that social imaginary is at work. Now, of course, the question that comes up is, now that you're here, what belongs to you, and how are you going to be a success, you know? And if it's hard work and so forth, that's good. But then if it's like taking over someplace else, somebody else's land or people, you know, I mean, that could come into play for immigrants themselves. The Belhar part confession that I highlighted is the following, and there's much more. We believe, this is at number 4, that the church, as the possession of God, must stand where the Lord stands, namely against injustice and with the wrong. That in following Christ, the church must witness against all the powerful and privileged who selfishly seek their own interests and thus control and harm others. Therefore, we reject any ideology which will legitimate forms of injustice and any doctrine which is unwilling to resist such an ideology in the name of the gospel. And so at least you have the articulation, you know, confession of how, how to think and what we are committed to. So I think that's a great way to, I would say, theologically healthy, rooted way to move forward. The two books I would recommend, and one, the first book was actually because we had Alan Bosak a few years ago for the convocation, and he had mentioned a few books, and I think this book is so good, sharp, to the point. Dare we speak of hope, and he phrases the chapters in the following: dare we speak of hope only if we speak of woundedness. Only if we speak of woundedness. Yeah. And so we can't just jump on hope without hearing the stories of what happened. I think what we got in Mark Charles is part of that. Not the only, but we need to hear that. Dare we speak of hope. Only if we speak of struggle. So there's conditions for speaking about hope. You can't just speak about hope. You have to kind of earn it in a way in terms of what that hope entails. There we speak of hope only if we speak of seeking peace. There we speak about only if we speak of fragile faith. And I think this is an incidence of a fragile theology faith. There we speak about only if we speak of dreaming. And so I think there is a movement, hopeful forward direction that will involve conversation. I think the great gift of Mark Charles is that we got to hear. And we may quibble about the moral equivalence of Abraham Lincoln and Hitler and all this, but the heart of what he had to say was so powerful. And it was in your face intentionally, and it was gripping. And it's worth listening to our brother in Christ. The other book that's really good, I would recommend, is Liberating Reformed Theology in both senses. Let's liberate Reformed theology, and Reformed theology itself can be liberated. There's a chapter in Andrew Wall's book here, Missiology, is one of the most wise folks I have read. The gospel as prisoner and liberator of culture. So as a missiologist looking at the Christian movement, and all church history is a mission movement at core. The gospel at times is a prisoner. It gets co-opted by the culture. It could be the culture of empire, culture of conquest, and sometimes it could be liberated. It could dislodge these worldly allegiances. The other book, I just briefly looked at is Engaging the Kingdom. I mean, Walter Wink. I mean, he addresses the system of dominance. It's basically Satan is at work, but it's not invisible. You can see it. You can see it. Just like God's work is manifested in human behavior and structures, you see the satanic work through structures and manifestation. And one sign of that is a system of domination. And so I just recommend those texts to you. Yeah, Quinn.
I don't know Reinhold Niebuhr well enough. Does he go in any of these directions? Because he certainly talks about systemic evil. And sort of, if there is a core foundational doctrine around which we build theology, would be sin. But I don't know that, I just don't know his thought well enough if he's a resource for thinking about this, or if it even appeared to him. Obviously, he's a German immigrant.
Yeah, what I remember about Moral Man and Moral Society is that the kind of theological oomph, grounding, or sort of a directive is missing. I mean, he's from, this is a while ago. I mean, he settles into what do they call it? Realpolitik? I mean, in terms of balancing out evils and you need checks and balances. It's not a liberating thing, and it's not a confrontation of where the church has been. You know, so I think what we're offering, what Bosak and Taguchi's offering, is much more directed towards, and it even begins, I think, in one of the chapters, the judgment begins in the house of God. Judgment begins with the church. And so the conversation that needs to take place is not so much over there, government. It's like, hey, folks, let's own up to the church is wrong. And I think that's the beginning of some addressing. But again, I haven't recently read Niebuhr, but there's nothing wrong.
He does critique nationalism, I think. I've forgotten if it's that other broader text. And of course, a lot of that's aimed at communism, false nationalism. But
I'm so excited to get back to it's just Paul, who's such a modern apologist, or come around the edges saying, we're really okay.
Yeah.
So maybe but it's no problem with whether you're right. It's just your right.
Okay.
let me ask you about election. What's the problem there? In your view?
Right.
I mean, does Bart have the solution that all are elected, or is there some other nuance that we need?
Well, predestinally rigged.
Well, that's certainly the extreme report of view. It's
Yeah. I mean, it does have a shadow side to it, of course. Understand the elect versus the unelect, and they'll never get elected. And so,
our book of order, I think, has the election is the salvation and to service.
Right. Yeah, the service piece is one way to soften it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't quite answer the question.
But why
of,
does God choose people?
Yeah.
So to build the earth, to basically keep the promise or fulfill the promise made to Abraham. That all people would come to know the Lord.
Yeah.
That's the purpose for Israel's election, and that's
right. I think election and justice are compatible. Election and honor are compatible, and so I think it would be the misuse of election. And the book I would recommend in terms of this broader topic is Wolfersworth's book on justice, rights and wrongs. And so every human being created in God's image deserves appropriate honor, because God loves human beings with attachment love. And so that is getting into a scriptural understanding of the value of the human being. And so whether you're elect or not, that doesn't make any difference. And so that honor, and so to not honor is a form of injustice. And I think what you have is profound dishonoring of a people. And a demonizing. I mean, it's not that you're not honoring, but you're actually adding to that, a dishonoring, and so I think the fundamental problem there is we're getting the very view of how God views human beings wrong. Not to mention love your enemies. But it's this poor understanding of justice. Love seems kind of optional, but justice isn't. But it's called justice of rights and wrongs.
But, I'm not sure Jesus ever said that everybody's God's children. He was a real Israelite.
Sure, he was. That's right. That's right.
And it's something we really have to grapple with.
Yeah.
Paul was a little better at it, but he said, you know, we have to love others regardless if they're being Israelites or not. But that's
right.
different than
That's right,
saying
that's right.
everybody is called.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
That's why I think
I
these are
still think he
separate.
thought that
Yeah.
they were chosen people.
Yeah, yeah, I don't think you need to be, you don't have to change your view of election to bring about, to act justly. You know, so I think these are two different subjects. Even if you have a very strong view of election, you are still called, so to speak, to treat human beings with honor.
Yeah.
You know,
No doubt about that.
they're separate. You don't have to change that. And so, how do we respond with the time that we had?
Keep going.
Yeah, keep going. And the first thing is lament. The lament. And we're gonna wait for the April 29th. Lament is sitting in that woundedness. I mean, and this is behind us. I mean, it's still part of, I was reading a book on, some other book on Native American, I think, Spirit of Crazy Horse, Peter Matheson. And the book begins with, "We are still here." Indigenous way, we are still here. We're not extinct. Yeah. But so one, there, our friends are still here. But there is still generational pain. So part of Mark's teaching is trauma, I guess, transferred generation to generation. Why is that? Because you share that story. And so lament as a church is to say, listen, it's us placing ourselves in the position of hearing God's heart. And so I would tie it in what Calvin's insight. It's the cry for justice, but also recognition of pain and woundedness. And you sit there for a while, you know, to understand it. So this is opposed to sort of a quick fix. Well, let's fix that up and stop crying. Let's kind of move forward. Jesus is good. There's a tomorrow. It's like, what you know, if the trauma's deep, then the lament has to be appropriate. Has to be appropriate to the injustice and the pain.
I love the term lament, and also I feel like people get caught between mourning a loss and having a grievance over a loss.
Yeah.
You're grieving, I'm still mad about it.
Yeah.
You're hanging on to
Yeah.
it, as opposed to mourning and digesting. And
Yeah.
changing.
That's mourning. Yeah.
But lament, I like it because
Yeah.
everybody knows what it means.
Yeah.
But not really.
Yeah.
And so it's a word that we don't use it in normal daily comments. So it's a fresh word that already has meaning. But I think it's essential that we fill that lament bucket so we don't get into the guilt bucket.
Right.
Just like mourning loss and grieving loss, or healthy and
Yeah.
non-healthy
Yeah.
ways of dealing with loss. Stepping into a situation where there has been harm and lamenting that without feeling guilty that it's your fault. It just is a sad state of affairs that we need to recognize and honor the tragedy that is the culmination of water tumbling down this waterfall we're part of in the district of Island.
And again, we'll get more of lament or understanding and practice of it in a month's time, and so I think that's a proper response. I would also include consolation. It was interesting. This book that I got, Michael Mini-Colloquy. He's not even a religious Jew, but he was asked to comment on the book of Job, and so he ended up being pulled into the sort of the power of consolation. And consolation overlaps with lament, but consolation recognizes that certain thing is over, like when someone loved one has passed away. And so I think there's a consolation. The world will not be recovered in terms of the indigenous nation unless the whole structure of American government changes. It's not going to go back. And so there's a certain death to how things have been. And so this is a consolation for our friends and not so much consolation for ourselves. We lament with our indigenous brothers and sisters, but in the position of the non-indigenous, we can console. Right? And so, but that consolation is only possible if you are a friend. And so the story that's in Mark Charles is, this is what I want, you know, and shares that metaphor of a big house, grandmother locked up upstairs. Everyone, uninvited guests are having a great time in the house. You just want somebody to come on up, unlock the door, and say to the grandmother, thank you. I'll begin the conversation with thank you. And so if healing is heart to heart, if healing is a people's history, that healing can't come about just by a doctrine, you know, a statement of repudiation of the doctrine of discovery. I mean, that's good. That's good. It has its function. But I think in terms of bringing consolation and proper sympathy and empathy is like, I hear your story. Now, I teach a course at Leland on spiritual formation, and there's a professor of psychiatry from UVA I invite to talk about a topic about attachment love. And one of the students asked, what about people who go through trauma? Is there healing? People who, and he said, yeah, there is. Deep listening. When you listen deeply to someone who's been traumatized, healing takes place. And then he tells his residents, listen to the music, not just the words. And so and you can see some of that in Mark, Charles, and others. So it's the woundedness, the pain is not abstract at all. It's personified, it's in people. And I think there's a ministry of befriending, being with them. And part of it is hearing their story. I would add prayer. You know, I see prayer as coming in different sort of with different dynamics, so to speak. And a prayer addresses, I would say, one's heart. And then this is an experiment we could do. Like you pray for someone who just annoys you, you don't like, you just pray for that person every day and see if there's any change of attitude. And so when we're praying for a friend or indigenous people or a tribe, when you make it a habit of praying, then your heart gets more open. And then the friendship happens more readily, consolation happens more readily. And when you enter into that space of prayer, you also get the heart of God's heart too, God's perspective. So it's a deeper work of the Holy Spirit in our subconscious, I would even say. And so some of those blind spots and biases may be, unveiled.
Just to make sure there's no misunderstanding. Prayer and word describing changes us as much as it changes the prayer to change somebody else. Right?
Sure, I believe in effectual prayer. I don't think of prayer as just sort of a kind of spiritual therapy, and so I have a friend who's a conservative Calvinist. It was a weird conversation. He says, "Oh, I don't pray." I go, "Yeah, I don't believe prayer actually changes anything.
Hmm.
So I said, at least you're consistent. You have a certain view of God's sovereignty. So he doesn't pray for anything to change. I go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. You don't pray for certain outcomes. All right. That's kind of interesting.
Richard Foster, his best word on prayer in celebration is to pray is to change.
Yeah.
One thing will change when you pray. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You already have.
Yeah.
You're afraid to change.
Well, but as you have a conversation with God about whatever you're
Yeah.
having a conversation, then then who I am changes as we change in our encounters with God.
Yeah.
But we have to have the encounter. So I would
Yeah, that's
say to
right.
your countless
Yeah.
friend
Yeah.
Right.
that at least he will change.
Yeah, Calvin says that in several places.
Yeah,
It's not-
yeah.
It's not to leverage God at all. It's about changing.
Right,
hearts.
right. And again, we don't want to get into the whole theology of prayer, but there are areas where I would say it's in the gray area in terms of because you prayed, things did change.
Mhm.
And so if God grants us choice, it's not like God is a monarch who forever dictates everything, but there are areas. It's interesting. Disciples of Jesus was trying to cast out a demon, and he says, "Oh, that kind only comes out from prayer." Now they added later the latter text, prayer and fasting, but the older, more ancient text is prayer. And in our churches we pray for the sick, and some are healed. And so our theology of prayer is it changes, but the prayer here is we're praying for the folks, Lord. So when we're praying, Lord, may you comfort somebody. Let's say somebody's grieving, and we're praying, Lord, may your comfort be upon them, may your peace. Do you really believe that, or is it just kind of rhetoric? This is some kind of piety. And the fact is, comfort may come. Holy Spirit may respond to your prayer. But my larger point is the activity of prayer, this quiet activity of consistent prayer, a regular prayer, will affect you, will change you. Sure.
I love all four. Two more.
Yeah, yeah,
One is that coming to grips with this fundamental feature of our heritage,
Yeah.
as a globe, is the big rock in the middle of this particular creek. And it is backing up the creek and creating a set of congestion in the system that is not sustainable and will fall. We're at a point of generation right now where our choices are to either Uber Ross just deny or continue to ignore, which is what most of us do. But once we embrace, and I think there is a waking up, a coming to grips with, a honest review of our own biases and blind spots, and this opens up. And then the next one is, we need to tell the truth about it, and it's not comfortable, and it's not going to go down well. When we basically say our political institutions, our religious institutions, our social institutions are sick and to death, and are going to change. The question is, what role do we have in how they change for the next 50 to 100 years by the choices we make?
Yeah.
In this room today.
yeah. So the last recommendation I have is that, advocate. Now, Mark has a particular take on that. He doesn't think white folks should lead this. Even the conversation, you have to be invited. And so I think, Kenton, you and I had a very brief thing, and I could understand where Mark is coming from. Look, you guys messed it up, so to speak. You are welcome to speak if we ask you. But again, I don't think that's fully recognizing how God works. I just came back from Liberty University yesterday. There was a North Korea summit, and so we had two North Korean escapees and a powerful advocate named Suzanne Schulte. She heads up the North Korean Freedom Coalition. Yes, on Wednesday there were 9,000 students at the convocation. Yes, on Thursday night, which I was part of the panelists with Suzanne, we had 1,000 students. But one of the questions that Suzanne got, she's part of Falls Church Anglican. She's white Anglican. One of the most vocal advocates for human rights in North Korea. And she's often asked by Koreans, like, you're not Korean. Like, why are you doing it? And her answer is, well, being Korean or not Korean is in a way irrelevant, because this is an issue of justice. You know, and so she's been stirred by, I would say, God's call on her life for justice. And so I think in terms of people and leaders who are moved by this, they could pray and talk, and if they're invited by a Native Indigenous person, can you speak up for this? If you, great. But you could start to pray and think about how you can be a positive.
It does occur to me, though, that as a white person, that advocacy might be able to be a part of us overcoming otherness.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I see at least some virtue there.
Yeah.
And that's been a conversation here nationally in response, particularly to George Floyd. And so our session has published and adopted a policy on racial reconciliation. And there are, as a church, we read a book together, the one by John Perkins, One Blood, had groups that are working on this whole question. A Sunday school class that continues on various topics they're mixed, but it certainly, I mean, the way it was led by our pastor, David Rennick, is white.
Well, there are lots of venues for advocacy, and part of it is among our own selves and our own institutions, and that's part of what's going on
Right.
for y'all.
Well, that's exactly
Right.
what I'm thinking.
And the role of earning the place of being an ally, say, you have to learn a lot about a situation and our history and claim it to do that. And I think that's part of maybe what Mark is saying.
Right.
You know, African American justice movements and anti-racism movements are training people in anti-racism so they can become allies. And they seem to be in a little bit different place than what Mark is saying, but maybe we have to earn the right of an invitation,
Right.
you know, by the work we do amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
And he's not saying don't show up
Right.
for let's say a land rights
He's not
protest.
saying that
But he's saying he's saying we're not the ones to be the lead the charge at all.
Yeah, and
Right.
I don't dispute that at all.
Yeah, I don't either.
Our
And-
presbytery actually has that with wider allyship training. Isn't that?
Well, it's anti-racism training. Yeah.
But I thought it was allies. I mean, specifically that. I know that
Oh, maybe.
that
Maybe.
my wife Nancy went through it
Yeah.
early on.
Yeah. I see it as like moral protocol. You know, it's when someone's been wrong and they don't want your help, you respect it. You know, but if someone's been wrong and say, I'm willing to talk. And so there's a moral protocol to it. My only slight pushback is in terms of basically you don't have to be invited to do some of these things, you know, praying, if there's a bill, you don't need an official welcome by a Native American person to do it, you know. Now, if you're organizing a larger event, like a conference, workshop, conversation, you know, then basically, who asked you to come to this meeting?
Right,
Who are you? You know,
right,
you know.
right.
I think the more fundamental issues with the doctrine of otherness has been applied to the American Indians, to American slaves,
Yeah.
to the Hispanics
Yeah.
in South America,
Yeah.
to the Miramar dynamics. You know, the Indians in the United States in the next generation don't have any more claim to righteousness or any of that than all the females in the world who ended up being born in a patriarchy. But it's a problem,
Yeah.
and it shows up every time you look through the lens.
Yeah.
Look through that telescope,
Yeah.
and you're going to start seeing what the Copernican does instead of what the priest has been telling us.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a big issue. It's
Yeah.
central in our global revolution that's going on the next 100 years or so, is to either root that out or embed it.
Yeah. Well, it was a tip O'Neill, all politics is local, and so this is kind of a focus. You know, the advocacy is never like general, like the theology of the other, you know. And so I think that is a bigger, I mean, larger topic. And the so in talking to the North Korean refugees, I know the situation. Here's the great irony, sad irony. Many of those who escape actually commit suicide in South Korea.
Oh, God, have mercy.
Where? Once they get here.
To
Yeah,
South
well,
Korea.
You know, so they risk their lives to get out, families, young people, they through Thailand, asylum, they end up in Seoul, South Korea. They fall into depression, despair, suicide. Why? Well, they're seen as second-class citizens. Although they're homogenous, like genetically the same, the attitude, language, work, stereotype, anti-North Korean stereotype. They don't belong. They can't speak. They speak with an accent. You know.
There was a similar dynamic when the Berlin Wall came down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There was a really scornful view by the Messies against the Easterners.
Yeah. And so the theology of the other, I mean, that's at work, you know, I mean, in terms of broader ideology. And so
It's not a,
It's an issue.
you know,
And it's the dominant
you know,
rock in the
you know,
play.
you know,
Until we deal with it and do like Jesus did,
you know,
suggested,
you know, you know,
we got a deep chronic civilizational crisis. It stems at this right here.
Yeah.
Selfishness is good, but looking out for number one is a mandate.
Yeah.
And anything serves you, it's fine with God and the rest of us.
you know. Lord, we repent. Repent of it.
Many years ago now, Elizabeth O'Connor wrote kind of the foundational book, Journey Inward, Journey Outward.
Yeah.
And the journey outward is not even possible without the journey inward first. And so in order to be an advocate, you have to do that other work. An awful lot of white male types want to just do the advocacy and go to the journey inward. It's true to get going. And so, yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's true.
And in this case, it doesn't work that.
But we have to remember the social othering is also had other dynamics besides race. I mean, the whole eugenics movement in this country was against white trash. Quite frankly, it was against folks who would just go on and have more children like they were, and that's how it was targeted. And we've done that with the poor, no matter what their race, and all this
We
stuff.
got a full-blown suicide. This crisis in this country over those dispossessed or uneducated white people.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep, that's right. I do have a question for us to think about, and that's about the David Gambrell event, and whether or not we ought to invite a Native American to be part of that conversation.
I'm gonna be talking with Mark Wednesday.
And I asked
Yeah,
this for
maybe,
two reasons. Part to plan together so
Yeah.
that David is able to include in lamentation this particular issue
Yeah.
of wronging and, the land and the, original inhabitants or the caretakers of the land. But the other piece is, are there things from native lamentation, native practices, Native American practices that we could learn from? I mean, the first time I ever experienced Korean lament in worship, and I was blown away by that. It's, and that's it. Well, you would have more to say about that, but the power of that was just ultimately striking to me as a buttoned up Presbyterian. We would never do that in worship, but maybe we should allow for something, right? And the white Presbyterian Church. But that is a question. So I'm glad you're
Yeah,
following up on
let
that.
me ask Mark and right, it'll be odd. It'll be wonderful, let me put it that way, it'll be wonderful to have somebody like Mark if we can't come, others,
Right.
Good. Go run it by David too.
Yeah, but we are inviting him, right?
Sure,
And
sure,
so
but just to see what you might
We're
already have done.
yeah, oh yeah,
He's
absolutely.
worked on it.
Yeah. Has he
Oh, yeah,
on the native issue, Native American
on the
issue?
Doctrine of Discovery.
Right,
Oh, good,
and he's
good.
in
Okay.
conversation
Thank
with
you.
indigenous.
Thank you. Oh,
Yeah,
thank
yeah,
you.
I mean, his office, Theology and Worship.
Yeah.
Did some of the work on this paper.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe
Thank
we
you.
could talk to David first.
Well, yeah, that would be fine too. I mean, he may have a interlocutor he would recommend we bring. Good. Well, do you want to
Yeah,
pursue that with David and Mark or Mark? David first, Mark second.
yeah, I mean, I could talk to.
You could ask Mark in general about the idea.
Yeah.
Is the idea
I mean, it's
decent?
sort of
Yeah.
follow up.
But with David, we should follow up. Okay.
Yeah.
What, me?
Yeah.
Oh.
You'd be good.
Okay.
You've been, I could do it if you.
I don't mind. I mean, if I can, and I don't. Quinn knows him well, but
Well, it's
Oh, yeah,
whoever's
Quinn.
gonna-
So it's
yeah,
been,
it's been a team effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've considered you part of the team. So.
but there, you write great emails, and so I
I
would,
think it's combination.
no.
Let's talk, Quinn. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, you guys figure
We'll
it
figure
out.
it out.
I mean, you write
Yeah,
great
Yeah. Okay.
emails, and so.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the session, and there's missing from the responses when you had, there was some form of reparations. You didn't
Yeah.
add that to the list.
Right.
So I would not add it to the list. I wonder why you do.
Right, I'm just thinking, these are things that we can do. I mean, I think, even immediately, as we're gonna do start with lament, and as we befriend, pray, as the advocacy comes in. Mark Charles did post, if a native tribe asks you for your land and church, would you give it to them? That's something that.
Or would you pay them property tax?
Yeah,
which
property
is
tax,
something
whatever.
he said
I
we
mean,
could just do.
So that,
you know.
but that's gonna involve process.
Yeah,
And that could be part of advocacy.
But in terms of
Yeah.
just
But he was.
repair
yeah.
is something that could be had.
Sure,
Because
sure.
repair is bigger than what we now think of as reparation.
Right.
And I think consolation is language. I mean, not consolation. Yeah, what conciliation
Conciliation,
is part of right. I mean, that leads in that direction. But he really wasn't endorsing reparation.
Well,
Right,
didn't
at
say
this point.
reparation,
No,
I said
he wasn't.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
Relational
repair.
repair.
I understand.
Yeah.
That he's all for that.
I mean, these are just, these are stepping stones. I think we could do it this way.
Well, I think we should just give them the state of Texas and move everybody else out. As a Texan, I can say that. Or at least the Panhandle and get back in Oklahoma. And anyway, forget it.
Roll it.
Yeah, we are out of time.
And we have this whole recommendation.
Yep.
that we haven't.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I just highlight a few. don't know how many of these were actually taken up.
Your church.
Yeah,
No, no,
in the
this is-
statement at
this
the
is
end,
The
church
commission
statement.
that wrote it up, it's not National Capital, but National
Kinda-
Presbyterian.
Yeah, it's kind of typical though, right?
Yeah.
Educate, you
Sure.
know, educate and educate.
Yeah. Direct mission agency, direct, so, I mean, you could take a look at it. I'm not even
Speaker
sure how many.
Bureau.
I get talking, I applauded, and then I said, what happened? And what impact did it have? And
Yeah, I don't know if there's a follow-up, but clearly, when I mention my lack of exposure, high school, college, seminary, not only recently, there's something wrong here. And so at a minimum level, I think the seminaries, the Presbyterian seminaries need to address it, part of church history, church.
Yeah, it should be woven into the main
Yeah, it
curriculum.
should,
actually,
it should.
you know, except for maybe
Except
occasional.
that this group has no authority.
Yeah,
And so what's instructive is the verb urge, direct,
Right,
encourage.
right.
That's all they
Yeah.
can do.
But moral suasion is a kind of.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but
Right.
direct is
Yeah.
within the entities within the PCUSA.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
can
right.
direct them.
Right, right.
Coty, they can only encourage.
Yeah,
Right,
that's right.
right,
They
right.
didn't urge Coty, they encouraged.
Right.
Coty,
Yeah, yeah.
But they
Yeah.
urged session.
Yeah.
Anyway. it's
Yeah,
just-
yeah.
it's-
Yeah, guidance.
That's one way of wording. I think courage is what we lack and what we need.
Yeah, yeah.
We got everything to lose. If the current system we champion is illegitimately running. It scares us and our world is full of fear because we know it's true and it's killing us. We need to come to grips with that. I know we're beyond it. It's our last couple decades, what we do with virtual. So,
We need a plan to revamp pensions, to get people's attention about the economy.
just a moment.
You know, maybe you have one, you know,
We seem to be very good at making this what should do. We seem to be very bad at following up how those actions worked out.
yeah.
Right. I mean, they're just not authorized. I mean, it's a recommendation. So, yeah.
Yeah,
But here's my standpoint overall, like, and this is a sort of a drastic contrast. One, we could be doing nothing. No Mark Charles, we don't even, we could have chosen not to address this at all. I mean, that's one. But we are addressing in our capacity. So this is a movement. Now, how far, how big this gets, who knows, but we're not the only group that's doing it. And so I think if there is an awakening and awareness, this part of Christian American history, may the Lord bless them. And may the Lord grant us courage. Because it takes courage to deal with it, and it'll take courage to make some sacrifices.
One of the models, one of the models that's not really addressed is a foreign missions model, as we used to call it, foreign missions. And it's called intercontextuality. It's a whole body of literature around it. And that is partnering, and we do it in the presbytery, partnering between a locale or a congregation and another locale in a congregation, and building those relationships over time. And it would be fascinating, wouldn't it, to talk about partnering a sister, Native American congregation in the PCUSA or elsewhere, and beginning that process of mutual befriending, learning, pulpit exchange, leading of worship. Get that's a concrete step. That's right. That
It's wonderful.
that we've encouraged this in foreign missions a lot in the last 15, 20 years. And it would be fascinating if, as a presbytery, we might begin to take that on.
You could get in touch with the office that heads up the indigenous ministry. Find out from them what churches may be a good fit. What we're here to help. What can we do? So that's. I do want to close out our time. Thank you so much.
John, thank you.
Thank you, John.
This has been good.
Thank you for being